Well, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. It's good to see y'all. We're going to be starting shortly. We're just waiting for a few more attendees to join in here. Let's give it about another 20 to 30 seconds, and then we'll go ahead and get started while things settle down there. Okay, so we're about a minute in. Today we're going to be doing a live demo here for those that may not be familiar with Domotz. The idea is how can we show you guys how Domotz works fundamentally, but I also want to address it in a way that kind of gets towards some of the problems that you as a service provider or a commercial integrator may be having. With that, let's get started on this. A couple things I want to go over here. First of all, this is meant to be interactive, although it's a webinar and you can't necessarily speak to us. We do want to hear your questions that you have. We want to be able to answer those as they come up. So Giancarlo is with me, and we also have some of our support and sales team with us that can help address questions while they're going on. So if the question is pertinent to what we're doing in the agenda, we'll definitely address that at that time. Otherwise, we'll answer it at the end as best as we can. Over our agenda, we'll talk about what Domotz is, how Domotz works, but then we want to talk about different problems that we get questions about from various customers of ours, right? One, how do we assess the problems? You know, when we have a service level agreement in place, what do we do with that? How do we keep a customer, going with us? We'll talk about reporting and some of the benefits there, and then we'll talk about how we help you be more efficient and hopefully standardize all your customers on a solution like Domotz and how that can help you. And then at the end, I'm going to leave it to Giancarlo, our CTO, to talk about some of the newer features that are coming, some integrations we have on the horizon, and some more. And then we'll get to the Q&A. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. Occasionally, you may see a poll come in, just asking for your opinions to help us learn a little bit more about you guys. So if you can answer that, great. Let's go ahead and get started. So what is Domotz? So first of all, Domotz is a tool. It's a software as a service. We look at ourselves primarily as a remote network monitoring and management tool in a world of IoT.
GP,
Giancarlo, are you not seeing my screen?
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. Yeah, I'm not seeing that screen. Your screen.
Bobby, are you seeing that screen? Yeah, Giancarlo, it seems like it might be something on your end. Hopefully,
Okay.
if anybody can raise their hands to let us know if they're able to see it, that would be great. So there's a little raise your hands section there. I'll assume that y'all are seeing this, Giancarlo, if I bring over.
Yeah, I will try to reload that one. No problem. Thanks,
Okay.
GP.
All right. Very good. So one of the benefits of having a network monitoring and management tool, especially in today's days, more and more devices are being connected to the network. What we want to help you guys do is provide a way for you to use this tool to improve your business. We want you to be more efficient. And frankly, we want you to use this as a tool to help generate more customer loyalty. Some of the ways in which we do that is through really good IoT discovery and classification. When we say that, when we discover devices on the network, we can classify them by make, model, and more importantly, type, right? What are these types of devices? We want to help you proactively monitor these devices. So if there's a system that's on the network that is important to you or your customer, we want to make sure that you can set alerts on it, you can monitor it, make sure it's running as expected. And more importantly, on the management of those devices, right? How can we help you securely connect to those systems and be able to manage them remotely? Furthermore, when it comes to efficiency, you really need a system that is easy to use and can be deployed quickly, and Domotz really allows for that. So that being said, let's get to the demo itself here. Hopefully y'all can see this as I bring it over to my screen. So this screenshot that you're seeing is the Domotz application. I'm running on a Mac, but we have a Windows application. You also can see Domotz from a mobile app. It looks like we got one of our polls up, which is great. So this poll here helps us understand, really what markets you're in, and it'll help us kind of cater some of the messaging that we do as we learn this. So, but we also have a mobile app. So if you have an iOS or Android device, you'll see this same type of user interface. Fundamentally, this is the application portion of Domotz. This app, whether it's running on your desktop PC, your laptop, or your mobile device, is communicating with our cloud infrastructure. The cloud infrastructure is really where we have a lot of our intelligence. A lot of people ask where we host it. It's hosted on AWS. And just so you guys are a little bit more familiar with this, we actually have two cells, as we call it. We have a North American cell, which really encompasses Canada, United States, and Mexico for all of the laws that are associated there. And then we have a cell that's housed in Europe to cover things like GDPR. We're in, gosh, last time we counted, over 160 countries where Domotz gets used. So we're used throughout the world, monitored by tens of thousands of customers. So this is, or monitoring tens of thousands of customers and networks. So our cloud infrastructure is actually quite large. There's another portion that I think it's important for you guys to recognize about the Domotz infrastructure, and as we kind of hone in on some of these dots that are here. When you see a dot, this dot represents what we call an agent that is being monitored. The dot, or the agent, and for the service providers that are out on the call, or even the commercial integrators, it's important to note that when we use the term agent, there is a single piece of software or agent that resides on the network that it is monitoring. So there needs to be one location, whether you have that running on a Windows machine, or you have it housed on a Linux server, or you're using an embedded agent, whether it's something on like a Raspberry Pi or a Luxor router, or you could even be using the Domotz agent, what we call the black box itself, which you can purchase on Amazon. That software, there needs to be one of those per network that you are monitoring, and that's what represents these dots here. So the three portions of Domotz that make up Domotz is really the cloud itself, which is, again, where most of our intelligence is. It's that single agent that sits on the network. And then there's this application that you're looking at. So those are the parts that make up the Domotz ecosystem. Let's talk a little bit about how it works. But before I do that, I want to kind of address this in the form of how do we monitor the system? And let me point out a couple things. When you first walk into a customer site, whether it's going to be a new customer and new for you, or whether you're doing a takeover job, a lot of times what you need to do is assess what's going on in the network, right? You need to get an overall picture of what is on this network that you're dealing with. If you're more of a commercial integrator and you're doing an install into a video conference room or something like that, you probably know the inventory fairly well. So this part will be relevant when we talk about, okay, once all those systems are installed, what do we then do? Or how does Domotz then scan the network and look for it? So a couple of things, right? First of all, this NOC view that you see here, it's really a multi-tenant view that shows you all of the different networks that you're monitoring. But when we go into an agent, or when we set up an agent for the very first time, when we associate that agent to the cloud, the very first thing that it does is it will actually start to scan the network. It scans the network by using ARP requests at a layer 2 level. And fundamentally what happens is that Domotz collects or aggregates all of the MAC addresses that it sees at the LAN, or at the layer that it's on, okay? You can, or then what Domotz does is, once we discover the MAC addresses, we will then classify it. We take advantage of some technology from our sister company, Fing, to enrich all this data with make, model, and type. In fact, if I dive into one of these systems, I usually like to go to a camera. Let's see what's on this Sony TV. So here's an example of what we gather. So if we click on the device, you see we discover the MAC address, but we also look at layer 3 and get the IP address of that device. And then we look at higher application layers to see, okay, what are things like, is a bonjour name or UPnP name being broadcasted, a zero conf, MDNS, whatever it may be, we try to show that. And then what we do is we enrich this information as well to say, okay, this is a TV, it's made by Sony, you know, here's the model as sent by Sony or as it's been classified. And then we also can put up the actual name of the device. The idea behind this for you as an integrator, you as a service provider, is to really get a good visibility into, okay, I'm on this job site, these are all the devices. And rather than you going in and manually inventorying and saying, okay, this MAC address is actually this device, right? We do all that for you in a very automated fashion. So we think that this discovery is very useful to you. The next thing that we do once we look at all of these MAC addresses is we start to look at the network infrastructure. So we'll look for managed switches that are on that network. And when we discover a managed switch, we will then start to see if that switch has, if we have access to it through SNMP, okay, through the standard public-private strings. If you've changed those, you'll need to update this, of course, or if they've been changed. But assuming that the public-private strings are there, what we're automatically going to do is start putting all of the devices that we discovered and associating them with the ports that they're on in these switches. In the case that they are PoE devices, we'll show that there is power being consumed. Of course, one thing I will say is this is where you can start to look at or being able to turn these things on and off, right? So we're going to talk about that a little bit more when we talk about management of the devices. But over time, we start to interrogate things. And just so you guys know, I went through this massive change where I redid my network. So this data is not actually accurate, but you can see how we started to map the bandwidth associated with this device on this port over the last several hours. I just redid my network yesterday or over the weekend, and so things have drastically changed. So it's always fun to do live demos when you've changed things like this. We'll see what goes right and what goes wrong. A couple of the other things that I want to show is after we have looked at all of the ports, we actually build a topology. So a network topology to say, hey, here's how all of these devices are structured. We look at things like wireless access points. In fact, I'll even show you, we can look at firewalls, gateways, other things of that nature. But even if I click on these devices, you'll see, you know, again, what devices are connected here. If I look at this particular wireless access point, we can see, let's go to the upstairs WAP. That's one that usually has more devices associated to it. So on this device, should be able to see exactly which clients are connected to which WAPs. We can see things like which SSIDs they're on, which channels and frequency bands that they're in. So this is a very useful tool when it comes to monitoring the network infrastructure. Furthermore, when you have devices like, or wireless access points like Ruckus or Meraki or Ubiquity that are out there, things that have cloud managed services, we interrogate them a little bit further. In fact, we go as far as saying, okay, of the devices that are connected, what are the signal strengths associated with these devices? Again, from a monitoring and management point of view, this is a way in which you guys can help get visibility into all of these devices that are on the network and how they're performing. You can even go as far as looking at how has the behavior of these devices changed over time through a network performance perspective. We will ping all of these devices and we will look at their round trip delay, right? The RTD as we call it, to understand how is the behavior of these devices changing. Are we seeing a lot of drop packets? In fact, it's kind of funny, if I go back to that Sony TV, let's just see what happened. Because recently, since I changed this, I've been getting a lot, it's changing the network, I've been getting a lot of degradation in performance on this particular TV, and Domotz has been alerting me to that. And what I was finding is that I had a network infrastructure, even with all the changes that I've made over the last couple of days, that I have a network problem that was too many broadcasts going over the particular switch that this Sony was on. So this is just a way in which Domotz can help you discover these issues, and you can start to remedy things. One thing that we always get a question on, in fact, let me go back to this devices list. Let's close this out. We always get asked questions about VLANs as well as subnet monitoring. Domotz absolutely can look across multiple VLANs. You do need to configure the agent and the network interface card that's associated with that agent to be able to see the different VLAN tags, but we walk you through that depending on the agent that's there or that you're using. When you use the black box, the Domotz black box, it's much easier to configure the network interface cards as opposed to if you're using a Windows executable, but it is very possible to look across multiple VLANs. And then from a subnet perspective, in fact, you can see how I'm doing a couple things like with external hosts here. So we can ping different hosts. So here I'm pinging Google DNS just to do it. And you can see how we can monitor the performance as seen by the agent out to the network. We also can look at, I think, if I do SB80, yeah. So here, I'm doing an external subnet scan. Essentially, I'm looking outside of my LAN and looking at the modem. So this is just beyond the router, and I'm able to check that and ping that and take actions based on that as well to make sure that it's actually functioning as expected. So again, Domotz does absolutely have the ability to look beyond just the local area network that you're at and look at different subnets or VLANs. So that gives you kind of an idea about how Domotz scans the network. We map out the network to provide you with like this topology map that's there. We look at these wireless access points. We interrogate the infrastructure a little bit more. Let's talk about what happens when you have a service level agreement in place. Usually you have an SLA in place because you want to be able to respond to the customer in a fixed way. Of course, you likely are looking for recurring revenue from that customer. And we recognize the fact that you're probably managing more than one customer at any one time, right? You probably have multiple quote unquote agents that are deployed or dots on the screen that you need to be managing out there. So Domotz absolutely helps you do that. The way in which you start to do that is by setting the system up for alerting, right? You don't want to always be looking at your customers' systems and seeing if they're active, right? You want to be able to get automated alerts when those happen or when issues happen on the other end. And what I'm going to show you here is how do you set up alerts within Domotz on these particular devices. First, let me put types of alerts that we have right now. One are network alerts, which is really what the agent on the network is doing. So can the agent see the cloud? Is a new device being discovered by the agent? Do we see any security issues? Or are there network performance issues as it relates to the ISP that we need to trigger on? You also can do specific device alerts. So for every device that we've discovered on the network, you can go in and configure very specific alerts on those devices, such as did the device go up? Did it go down? Did the IP address change, kind of indicating a potential security issue, assuming that these are static IP addresses or reserved in some way. You also, and this is where Domotz starts to be really powerful, you can get in and monitor not only services that are running on particular devices, but also any SNMP, Simple Network Management Protocol sensors that may be out on these devices. And we'll show a couple examples there. Of course, I mentioned network performance. If you have a particular device that you care about the network performance and it needs to always be on, great examples would be things like voice over IP systems or security cameras or potentially even unified communication systems that you're installing, right? If you want to make sure that the codecs, the coders and decoders are performing as you need or want them to be, you can set alerts on those. We'll get into some of the alerts here in a minute or some examples, but these types of events that can trigger alerts are what I just showed you. Let's talk about what happens when you want to look at an alert. So it's very easy within each device or within the agent to either do a push notification to the mobile app on your phone or do an email alert to the account that you're logged in as. But where we find most service providers and especially most integrators really take advantage of Domotz is they connect this to a PSA tool, so a ticketing system of some sort that they're using. Whether you're using a service like Autotask or ConnectWise, or we've just recently added Freshservice to this, or if you're more of an integrator and using something like Q360, Zendesk, right? These are all ticketing systems that we commonly see. And by the way, this is an opportunity for me to say to you guys, if you have a particular service that you use or a PSA tool or ticketing system that you use that is not on this list, by all means, please email support@domotz.com. I know Giancarlo and myself are always interested in understanding what it is, the tools that you're using so that we can integrate with them. And in some instances, it may be helpful if you make a connection with the representative at that company and us through support, and we can then help drive a relationship there. So not only ticketing systems like these ones I've talked about are here, but also if you take advantage of webhooks and some of the newer, let's call it live systems that are out there, messaging systems, things like Slack, Microsoft Teams, any other webhook services like Zapier that you want to add, you can add these, what we call channels, so that if an event occurs on Domotz, that it can automatically push a notification into those systems. One thing that's nice, I will say, about ticketing systems is that when we create a ticket automatically, we also put all the information about the device and the site, but we also give you a direct link back to Domotz so that if you need to monitor it quickly or power cycle the system, you can do that. Same thing that happens, of course, on Slack or Teams. But one thing in the ticketing system is that you get a historical record of that particular device. So if you have a device that commonly goes up and down, you can start to see how many tickets it's actually opening or how often that happens, so that maybe there's a broader issue that you can address. Of course, if you just want to use general emails, so if you have a support@company.com that you want to push emails to, you can do that too for monitoring or record keeping purposes. So the alerting system within Domotz is actually quite a powerful tool for you. And you should see, how all of these alerts can get generated. One thing that this reminds me of when we talk about alerts and the network infrastructure is actually one of the things that we're doing with managed switches and with soon to be firewalls. So I think if I go to this particular site, since I own this, let's look and see if this is here. But one thing that we do is inside of Cisco, and new switches are coming on a regular basis, we can actually look at the configuration of those switches. And if the configuration ever changes, we can alert you to that. This configuration management within the network infrastructure, we think, is a very powerful tool. So we are automatically looking at the running config. And if the running config, well, first of all, we'll take a snapshot of that and save that off to the cloud. But if the running config ever changes, we will then take a new snapshot and assume that that's the running config, but we can generate an alert to you to say, okay, this configuration changed, and you can compare what changed on these. More importantly, we also look for misalignments between the running config and the startup config. And I'm sure all of you have dealt with this at some point, but if you went in, made modifications to the running config, and then forgot to save it to the startup config, and then a power cycle happened, you know that you lost all of those. Domotz actually will alert you to when there's a misalignment between the running config and that startup config. So that way, even if you left the job site, but you got that alert, you can actually go in, log into the system remotely, and then make changes as appropriate. One nice thing too about this is if you guys use common configurations across customers, you actually can save off these configuration files and then upload those into new sites. So it becomes kind of a templating tool as well. One thing that I want to mention here, and this all really is under the guise of how do we help improve the service to our customers, but when we want to generate alerts on systems, I want to talk about SNMP here real quick. We can get into, let's go to this site. Let's go do a search. Let's see if this is up and running now. So this is a thermal sensor. So it's usually used for server room monitoring. I should have some eyes set up here. So I talked before about SNMP capabilities. One of the things you guys can do, and this is just all being done to help set up alerts actively for your customers to make sure you're monitoring the things that you want. It's very easy to come in here and search for things like temp, right? Temperature. So the Domotz will automatically scan across MIBs that are associated with this particular device, and will show the what's called OIDs, the object identifiers, into these systems. You can then add that. Now I already have some for this one, so I'm not going to add those. So let's close this down, but you can see how we can look at things like temperature, humidity. But what's really cool about this is we can actually start to graph this over time. Let's see, I'll probably had some situations where the system, this system was always running because of, it was in a different environment. But you can see here, in fact, I just moved from one room to where I'm now in a server rack with it. But you can see how when the system gets utilized, the power goes up, and we can start to set alerts based on certain temperatures. In fact, I think on this particular device, I have an alert set up that if the rack room, or if the rack here goes above 105 degrees, to generate an email. This is very easy for you guys to do within Domotz. And if I wanted to do a push notification to a ticketing system, very, very simple way to do that. So here you start to see the benefit of SNMP, as well as the graphing capabilities and all the push notifications. Let's briefly talk about, let's go back to some switches. So let's say you guys have a particular device that all of a sudden triggered an alert, and now you need to do something. Let's say this switch had an issue. Well, one thing I didn't mention at the very beginning, but when we're scanning devices and understanding what devices are there, we're also scanning which ports are available for management on these particular devices. What we can do with this is that if I'm out on a different job site, or I'm at the office and I get an alert and I need to get in and adjust to this particular system here, we can do that. So I hit connect to port 80. Let's see if I remember my password, since I've just been changing all of this, and log in. So what you see here is that Domotz generated this unique URL. This code up here is very unique to my PC here at the office. It allows my PC and my PC only. If I were to pass this off to my colleague sitting next to me, he would not be able to use it. But this secure and encrypted connection goes from my laptop all the way up to the cloud, and then it re-encrypts back down into the lab that we have here. We then can get in here and adjust VLANs or see how the switch is performing as appropriate. Well, this isn't very exciting. There's not much on this one. So, but you can see how you can get in and make adjustments as appropriate. You can do this with any device that has a web portal, SSH, Telnet. If you're using a PC and you want to get into RDP, you can do that as well. You can create custom connections if you want to open up a TCP tunnel. So for the commercial integrators that are out there that use services or systems like Crestron, AMX, and other control systems, you know that you use a tool like Toolbox for Crestron. Well, what you can do is create a secure port to the controller on the port that's needed by Toolbox, and you can create, or we can provide you with this custom URL that you can input in your tool. We have several white papers and blog posts on our community forum that talk about exactly how to do that. But this allows you to take Toolbox, and rather than having it sit on a PC at the site, you now can just run Toolbox on your laptop in your office and remotely program or do firmware updates to those systems. So this is a very powerful tool within Domotz. Lighting systems for Lutron or Leviton, whomever, right? They all use third-party software, their own software, I should say, to manage the system, and you can use TCP tunnels to connect to that. One other thing that I want to show you is under this remote connections and VPN tab, okay, you can gain all the access to all of these systems here. You also can do an actual VPN, a virtual private network. We call it VPN on demand because what we do, and I'm not going to do it here since I'm on this webinar, but if I were to open up this tunnel, it basically forces the Domotz agent, that is that piece of software that's running on the network, to act as a VPN server. You need to have, of course, a VPN client, something like TunnelBlick. Here I'm using TunnelBlick up here to do that connection. But what the benefit of this is that you now put your laptop virtually onto that network. So now you can have access to multiple IP addresses or devices that are on that network. Very useful if you're doing large firmware updates or if you're troubleshooting networks in a broader sense. So I want to make sure you guys knew that. And then, of course, we can show you historical connections that have been made, who they've been made by, etc. So this is more for auditing, which we'll talk about in a minute. But I will say from a service level agreement perspective, getting back to you having an SLA, making sure that you have a way of tracking who's connecting to what systems and what you're doing for your clients is going to be beneficial, especially when we talk about this next section, which is ultimately how do you keep your customers coming back, right? Once you have an SLA, they usually expire after 1, 2, 3 years, whatever it is you set. Your goal is to make sure you re-up that service with that customer so that they can continue paying, whether you've installed new hardware or not. So a couple of the things that Domotz provides to help you with that really comes down to reporting and logging. Just like a historical view of what connections are made, we actually log every one of the accesses that your teams are making. I mean, here you can see Giancarlo made an access through the tunnel. Here I'm accessing cameras, things of that nature, right? But any of your team members that accesses devices, or if they power cycle systems, right? If they reboot systems, right? We log that and we put that into the history here. What does it mean for you? Well, for you, it's a way to audit the systems and make sure things are working as expected. But for your customers, you may actually want to generate reports to them to say, hey, you know, nothing went wrong with the system this month, but here's a report of all the activity that we have. So it lets your customer know that you are actively monitoring their system and what it is that you're monitoring or doing for them. You know, when things go right, we think that's all swell and nothing nothing bad ever happens, which is okay. But the truth of the matter is that as long as you keep a touch point with those customers, that's really important. And this brings up something that I wanted to show you guys. Let me close this here. So one thing that I always like to talk about is the recovery paradox, because this is important for integrators and MSPs to recognize. So over time, if nothing ever happens in a system, right, customer loyalty will just continue to rise. And that's the loyalty that a customer is sending back to you, right? They trust that you're doing your job. Where it gets really interesting is when an incident occurs. So when a failure on a network occurs, right, obviously the loyalty goes down, right? The customer's frustrated, right? There's you know, their angst, right? They have to stop doing what they're doing, right? Because and everybody's experienced this with a video conferencing system, or they've experienced it with, you know, not being able to connect to the Wi-Fi. But what's interesting about this is that you, as the integrator or as the service provider, really have an opportunity to shine here. The faster that you resolve the problem, right, the more information that you provide to the customer about what the problem was, and if you put a process in place to fix it, what you actually find, and this is why it's a paradox, is that the loyalty generated by your customer actually increases beyond what it would have normally been. Now, it's important that I say to you, you know, this doesn't mean you should go out and cause failures on a system, but if you can quickly solve these types of problems with your customer, and you can report on what the issues were, if you can remotely diagnose the things, solve them quickly, that loyalty is going to increase. And I think that really shows why a tool like Domotz is so powerful for you. So this reporting aspect is important, right? You can manually create these. You can automatically generate them on every 30-day basis. Domotz provides ways in which we can tell you things like, okay, what was the connection history, right? How was the performance of the system? Which devices went up and down? right? Who logged into the system? So these are all the types of information that Domotz provides in these logs for you. One of the things that I mentioned, or you may have seen, I mentioned it when it came to agent alerting, but it was the notion of security. I do want to point out, Domotz is not a what we call SOC. We're not a security operations center. We're more of a network operations center. But giving you information about what systems on the network, how they're behaving, we think is really important. Domotz will, because we're a cloud-based service, we have the ability from the cloud to look back into the network and see if there are open ports on the network. Again, we're not here to tell you what data is going in, what that's pointed to, but if there's a port that's open to a device on your network, that tells you that there's a potential of a vulnerability, and we want you to know about it. If you get the alert, you can either accept that the port is open, or you can reject it. If you reject it, it means that you've probably fixed it at the firewall, or you accept, or you got into the router and you closed it. Okay. In the case of you rejecting it, I will say that if you do reject it but you didn't fix it, we're going to do a scan the next day and we're going to alert you again to that with this capability. UPnP is interesting because what we're doing is we're actually, from the agent point of view on the inside the network, we're looking, are there UPnP servers available? And if devices are asking and getting access to external ports through UPnP, we're going to bring awareness to that. I think I have an example actually where, yeah, this particular house has 46 security issues, right? They're using UPnP in their systems. UPnP is really great for, it makes it nice and simple. You know, dare I say, it's a plug and play technology. It's a very legacy technology. Most service providers, most integrators will disable this. But if you're dealing with residential or you're dealing with the ISP modems, a lot of these times these things will be enabled. Any device on that network will often look to see if they can gain access through UPnP, just because it's simple. Now, I recommend that you turn it off, but if you need it, we're going to bring awareness to you and you can then look at what's going on in these systems. You may have noticed, just real briefly, that this is a beta right now and on my account, but we're starting to look at default passwords. You can imagine that if I have a port that's open to a device that's using a default username and password, that is a hacker's dream right there. So we want you to be aware of what's going on with that and make sure you change these passwords. So again, this is in beta. If you want to get more information about it, by all means, reach out to us. Of course, last thing I'm going to say is when it comes to setting of alerts, you know, new devices on a network, especially if you're a system integrator and you've built out a conference room, it's likely that devices should not be getting added to that. Or if you're a security provider and you've done security cameras, last thing you need is a new device that you don't know about showing up on the network. So we're going to alert you to that. And we look at that as a security capability there as well. Okay, so we've talked now about how we discover devices. We've talked about how we help you be proactive through alerts, whether those alerts are on individual devices or security alerts. We've also talked about being able to remotely connect to the systems that are there so you can actually proactively manage these systems. Let's talk about helping you guys be more efficient, right? How can we help manage all of your clients in the same way? And fundamentally, how do we help you standardize? One thing that we've implemented here, which hopefully a lot of the service providers that are out there will recognize, is Domotz is relatively low cost. At $19 per month per agent that's out there, it's actually a very low cost solution compared to competitive systems. And for the power that we provide, we think that it makes it so that you can really just standardize. I mean, it's a fixed, you know, it's $19 a month for this particular client. It's not going up or down based on devices or network infrastructure systems. So we think that it's a great way, and that's one way we help you standardize and get this deployed on every site. More importantly, right, we start to implement things like global management capabilities. So we've already shown you how at the NOC level, we're a multi-tenant view and you can see all your agents at one time. But more importantly, and this is a new feature that we've released within the last couple of months, is the ability to search across all of your agents and all of the systems out there. So if let's just take a random scenario. If I knew that Cisco released an update to all of their switches, okay, I can easily search on Cisco, and then let's actually take Meraki, since that I can see it right here, right? I can look for all devices that are out there that are classified as Cisco and Meraki. I can then easily go in and do whatever it is I need to do, right? From a Domotz perspective, if I select one of the devices that I've filtered out on, I start to show you all of the device settings and how we've configured that on this particular agent, okay? We look at properties of that device. Do we classify it as important? Is the type and everything correct on it? We can then take and export these settings and these properties out to a file. And then what I can do is when I go onto a new job site, I can start to do things like uploading that same exact configuration to all of the systems. In fact, if I deployed or made mass changes across, hundreds of clients, I actually have the ability to take one client as a template and then take the rest of the 99 plus customers out there and copy that exact same template over to them. So this is one of the powers that this global management feature provides you. And some examples, if I wanted to take like, let's see, I think if I do IP phone, so, well, that's not very exciting if it's not across, let's do Cisco again, because we know that there's a couple of phones here. So if I wanted to take a phone here, just as this example, change the credentials, right? If I needed to adjust how we authenticate within these systems, I can do that. One of these, I thought I had some shared alerts on. Maybe I don't, but if I wanted to go and push a shared alert on this particular system and then, or adjust multiple devices so that they all get the exact same shared alert going to the ticketing system, I can do those type of capabilities here. So I wanted to make sure I pointed out the Domotz environment. For those that have agents, I think if we type the word demo here, yeah, so you can search across agents as a whole. So let's say you have a particular customer that is a retail client that owns 3 different stores. And for some random reason, they changed their name. You actually have the ability to select those 3 clients, go in and change the customer name, change the business name, whatever you do, right? Change the shared alerts for it, all at one level. So you're not going into each individual system and doing that one at a time. So this global manage feature we think is really beneficial and helpful to you guys as service providers. So all that being said, I think we've gotten to the point where I think we've shown you a lot of the main functionality within Domotz. You guys can explore and see some of the other capabilities, like looking at network performance and how those things have changed. You can set up speed tests, you can disable these types of things. One thing that's really beneficial, especially when you're debugging systems, is getting network info, doing route analysis. You can do all of that within Domotz. One thing I didn't really talk a lot about, but I think it's important to mention here, when it comes to team members, it's very easy for you guys to set up team members that have access to all agents, as well as field operators that have access to individual agents. The other thing that happens when you go in here, and this is an important part of security, is 2-factor authentication. We view security as an extremely important part of being in Domotz, and you absolutely can set up 2FA for your customers, okay, and on your customer accounts. It's really more about your team members and making sure that it's actually your team members that are accessing these systems. So with that being said, I think it's time that we listen to Giancarlo here and see what's coming our way in the next few months. Meanwhile, we've got a poll. Giancarlo, are you there?
Yep, yeah. Thanks, JB. Actually, I would like to address a couple of questions. Some of them have
Okay.
been received today. Worth to address. Actually, I was going to ask this question from Francois, but you basically almost addressed the same exact topic with the configuration management part. Sorry, the global management feature. Basically,
Okay.
Francois is asking if I have if I have to set the same location and zone, for instance, on multiple devices, all in one. It seems like he was doing that one by one. So, for instance, on 10 devices, select one device, set the location, then close the device and go on. But actually, you showed a way to use a multi-select, not only across the multiple devices inside the same agent, but also across multiple agents. But the same functionality works also on the same specific agent. Now you can select multiple devices and then change properties or settings for that device in Domotz. The location zone is one of them. Time window or grace period to consider the device as offline is another one. All of these settings that you find as device by device settings now are available on this multi-select capability. So while still showing the poll, there is James was asking if he really likes the direct connection or the remote connection that you were showing as part of the remote connection VPN. He's wondering if there is a way to save credential to which device you want to connect. And now the reality is that we don't at the moment. We do not save the credential, but we are working that direction. It's not going to work, let's say, smoothless on HTTP or HTTPS connection because every single device has its own way of managing credential on the web browser, but it's going to work properly on the connection with the SSH or Telnet or RDP or even VNC to desktops servers.
Yep.
Those were basically a couple of questions that I want to address. Yeah, somebody was asking if there is a
Giancarlo?
Yeah.
One of the, in fact, this is interesting. I had a customer that I was talking to the other day about device credentials, and I mean, I'm curious about your comment on this. But one thing that a lot of people don't realize is that, first of all, Domotz is encrypted, right? You have to log in, and if you use 2FA, right, that's a benefit. But there's actually a notes field in the Domotz devices that allows you to do things like, and again, if you want to put, username, right, password, whatever it may be for these types of systems, you can absolutely do that. If you want to make notes about a particular device, maybe you need to figure out which ports certain things are connected. Take advantage of these notes, right? They get saved into the system, and this is for your account, right, and what you see, but this is a very useful field right here.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to make that comment, Giancarlo. Go ahead.
I agree. And going in that same direction, notes about devices, we are working making Domotz also a place where you can keep maintenance or keep data about the device that you care of. No, it's sort of asset management or inventory list.
Yep.
We have already fields that are available through the public API that you can add to every single device and retrieve that one. It's not available through the through UI. Speaking about the the API, something worth to mention is that every single account has access to this API key through which you can build your own script or your own portal or dashboard and retrieve the exact same data that you see in the Domotz UI on your own application.
Yeah, this is a very powerful feature. In fact, Giancarlo, you and Jacopo, one of our lead dev engineers, did a webinar, and it's available on our website now, about how to effectively use these APIs to. And in fact, the demo you showed was for pulling camera images. In fact, I didn't actually show that within Domotz System, but if I spell it right. One of the cool things that Domotz does is we have the ability to monitor security cameras. So they're IP devices, it's easy to monitor those, but we also have the ability to grab a snapshot. So why is this important? Well, if you wanted to not only make sure that it's online, but make sure it's functioning properly and it's live streaming, you can do that through Domotz. And using those public APIs, right, in the demo that you guys did, that 1 hour webinar, they show you how to generate reports based on that, which is really cool.
Yeah, that's a correct statement. And I mean, the same way they can do everything, almost everything, even create their own algorithm that react to events on Domotz. For instance, if you notice that the device goes offline and you have that device connected to a PoE port of a switch, you can trigger a remote reboot of that device through Domotz. It's definitely feasible. We will do another webinar on that topic probably in the next few weeks. GP, another question, and I will jump into what's coming next because this is really related. So Gary was asking, how can I add ticketing options? How can I add a ticketing system to be integrated? And it's worth to mention, that's under shared alerts and ticketing system. That's where you connect your external platform, might be Freshservice, might be ConnectWise Manage, might be Autotask, Datto, or even Zendesk, to Domotz, and then use that as a shared profile or shared alert profile and associate that shared alert profile to the device that you care, the device that you want to monitor, or the agent that you want to monitor. I want to bring on this view because I want to mention what just has been added. So Freshservice and Solution 360 has been added in the last few weeks. Freshservice is really fresh in this case. It's from last week.
That was a good one, Giancarlo. I applaud that pun. Yeah.
And I want to mention something that is coming soon, still as a ticketing system. So we are going to be approved as a certified partner for ConnectWise Manage. So ConnectWise Manage will be there as a certified integration, together with Autotask PSA, which was already certified back in January, February, something like that. And one which is coming probably next week, end of next week, or let's say 10 days, something, will be Synchro MSP. In the MSP space has been requested multiple times. And this brings me to the other topic I want to cover, what's next. So we are going to release also in a few weeks, I don't know if GB, if you showed the capability we have on the access point. So we do advanced monitoring of access point devices. We do already perform this capability on the Cisco Meraki devices, on the Rakos access point when they are local on the network and there is a zone director on the network. We do the same with Ubiquiti access point when the control system is local on the network. In next week, we are going to add the capability of adding an external controller for Ubiquiti. So for the Unify controller, users will be allowed to monitor the external controller, and through the external controller, get the data of the access point. So list of clients connected, signal level for every single client, noise level, traffic on every single Wi-Fi client, and so on. Then GPU correctly showed the configuration management for the switches, the Cisco iOS, Cisco SG, Luxwell Modman. We are going to reach the list of switches where we support the configuration management with the configuration management capability, but we are also extending to a different type of product or different type of devices. And specifically, we are going to address the firewall type of device. And we are starting with the adding the capability of monitoring, or let's say backup configuration for WatchGuard devices. And then soon after that, we look into the FortiGate and then Sonic Wall, and more will come in the future. Those are the most common and most, let's say, used by our customers.
Giancarlo, I think it's pretty exciting that we're getting the firewalls in there, because that's definitely been a request that's been coming to us over the last couple months, and I know that the team's been working hard to do that, and that's going to be really a good addition.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you, JP, on that. Super. The last thing I want to cover, and this is related to one of the last features you were showing, the team management and the possibility to configure two-factor authentication, actually to see if one of your team members has two-factor authentication configured. Now we are going to address a couple of features related to this. The first one will allow the team master, so the owner of the account, to force every single team member to have the two-factor authentication enabled and as a mandatory set for their team members. And this is because we care about security and we care about the security of our customer. In the same, let's say, line or way of thinking, we are also trying to force users to configure the two-factor authentication where possible. But also, we realize that many customers already have their own way of authenticate their team members into their platform. That's called single sign-on or SAM as a protocol. They have Microsoft AD, they use Okta, and this is one reason we are looking into that. We want to enable our users to use that single sign-on platform for all their collaborators or all their team members. This is probably something that is coming in the next few weeks as well. That brings me really at the end. There are others, of course, there are like tens of different features we are working on. Probably we'll mention in the next webinar in 2 weeks, but this brings me to the end of the presentation probably today.
No, that was perfect, Giancarlo. Your point about single sign-on, right, and SAML, I think is going to be really nice, especially for a lot of the service providers that are dealing with enterprise accounts or they're dealing with customers that have you know, larger ecosystems, if you will, larger networks. That's going to be really beneficial. It's just again one less thing to remember when we need a username and password. So I think that's great. Well, we're actually out of time, which is good. This is the first time, Giancarlo, that I think we've actually made it within the hour. So good job for us on that. And if you guys do have any questions, by all means, reach out to support@domotz.com. If you have any sales related questions, sales@domotz.com is there for you. So we've got two main email addresses that we leverage. Giancarlo and I both mentioned this, but I want to reiterate this. If there is a particular service that you guys use and that you want to see integration with Domotz on, by all means, reach out to support@domotz.com and let us know. Giancarlo and I both monitor that. We watch for those emails, and we take serious the requests that we get from our customers. So let us know what you want to see. And if you have any other general questions, by all means, please reach out to us. Thank you very much for your time. We know that your time is expensive, and we definitely appreciate what you've given us here over this last hour. Thank you so much. You guys have a great day.
Thank you.